They simply ignored our constitution, and I remind you, the constitution of 11th of August 1919. They replaced our Reich constitution of 11th of August 1919 with their own law. Anyone who deals with this topic knows that in a war, the conventions of war are the highest legal norms on a battlefield and between the fighting parties. These conventions of war, these international conventions of war, are called Hague Convention respecting the rules of war on land, and our state German Empire acceded 1907 to the Hague Convention respecting the rules of war on land. That's why the Hague Convention respecting the rules of war on land naturally is operative on German territory too, and that since 8 of May 1945 uninterrupted. According to the Hague Convention respecting the rules of war on land, the victors would have been obliged to organize and execute the occupation based on our constitution. Unfortunately, they didn't do that. They agreed among each other to ignore the German Constitution of August 11, 1919, to put it aside and created, based on the Hague Convention respecting the rules of war on land, their own allied occupation law. There are the famous Chef laws, there are the smut orders, there are control council laws, laws of the Allied High Commission, there are all kinds of decrees and orders of the occupying powers. All of these goes by the name of victor's right and occupation law. When the greatest need after the ruin in May of 1945 was over, the victors made sure that then, at first, the civic self-administration right for the Germans was created in the civilian administration of the Western Allied occupation zones. The aim was to gradually replace the military occupation law on West German territory occupied by the Western Allies with a civilian self-administration. It was then that they at first created the so-called United Economic Area. In disregard of international law, our different states of the Reich were liquidated. In other words, the structure of our Reich's territory was simply eliminated with a stroke of a pen, and by arbitrary orders of the Allied forces, so-called federal states or Bundesländer were created in the same form they still have today. After these territorial administrations were established by orders of the Allied commanders, a parliamentary council was created, and this parliamentary council was assigned the task of establishing the self-administration law and to compose it according to very strict tight proceedings given by the Western Allied victors. In about 1.5 years' time, the Parliamentary Council completed this task, and then in the year 1949, the so-called Basic Law for the Federal Republic of Germany was submitted to the Allies for their approval. Roughly, that is the course of development of how the Allies have put aside our true constitution and brought into the world their own civic self-administration law. By the letter of approval of the Western Allied commanders in May 1949, based on the Basic Law for the FRG, the execution of national jurisdiction over the German citizens was transferred to the self-administration organization Bundesrepublik Deutschland in the Western Allied occupation zones for a limited time. Again, as a general distinction, by a constitution the people of a nation constitute themselves in their free self-determination and lay down themselves the high standards of law on their own territory by their own free decision. What was imposed on us by Allied decree in form of the FRG is not a constitution but an organization and serves only the purpose of self-administration according to military default of the victor.
Nachdem sich auch diese Gebietskörperschaften gebildet hatten, wurde dann auf Geheiß der westalliierten Kommandeure ein sogenannter Parlamentarischer Rat gebildet. Und dieser Parlamentarische Rat hatte die Aufgabe, dieses zivile Selbstverwaltungsrecht zu begründen, auszuarbeiten. Und zwar nach ganz harten, sehr engen Vorgaben, die von den westalliierten Besatzungsmächten kamen. In knapp 1,5-jähriger Arbeit hat dieser Parlamentarische Rat diese Arbeit vollzogen und hat dann im Jahre 1949 das sogenannte Grundgesetz für die Bundesrepublik Deutschland zur Genehmigung bei den Alliierten vorgelegt. Das ist so die grobe Entwicklung, wie die Alliierten unsere eigentliche Verfassung zur Seite gebracht haben und anstelle dessen ihr eigenes ziviles Selbstverwaltungsrecht in die Welt gebracht haben. Durch das Genehmigungsschreiben der westalliierten Kommandeure aus dem Mai 1949 wurde dann auf der Grundlage des Grundgesetzes für die Bundesrepublik Deutschland die Ausübung der Hoheitsgewalt über deutsche Staatsangehörige in den westalliierten Besatzungszonen befristet an die Selbstverwaltungsorganisation der BRD übertragen. Nochmal als grobe Unterscheidung. Durch eine Verfassung konstituiert sich ein Volk in seiner freien Selbstbestimmung und gibt sich die in seinem Staatsgebiet herrschenden höchsten Rechtsnormen durch eigene freie Entscheidung. Das, was wir mit der BRD verordnet bekommen haben, auf alliierten Befehl, das ist keine Konstitution, sondern eine Organisation. Und sie dient ausschließlich der Selbstverwaltung nach militärischen Vorgaben der Siegermächte.
Sie haben jetzt den Unterschied zwischen dem Grundgesetz.
You now have pointed out the difference between the Basic Law and the last Constitution of August 11, 1919, chosen by the German people. In Article 146 of the Basic Law there is, I should prefer to say there was, a request for the Basic Law to be replaced by a constitution. Why, in your opinion, has an own constitution of the German people never been put to the vote, especially after 1990, when there at least has been a partial reunification? Here I briefly want to remind that in Article 125 of the Basic Law there is mention of occupation zones. Is this the case because we still are an occupied country?
Das ist sicherlich der wesentliche Grund dafür.
This is certainly the main reason, but you see, the idle wish expressed in Article 146 of the Basic Law cannot be related to the establishment of a new constitution, because we have a constitution even in accordance with international law. This has even been ascertained by the so-called Federal Constitutional Court over and over again. This constitution is still active according to international law. This was the reason why in 1948 the United Nations had to provide the German Empire a seat at the United Nations. But you see, precisely this fact is hardly known anymore. The legal situation in Germany is marked by the fact that since 8 of May 1945, that is, since the unconditional surrender of the military forces of our nation, we remain in the situation of an armistice. We live under martial law. To the present day, the Hague Convention respecting the rules of war and land is the highest right of war and occupation. And that is the reason why our Constitution of 11th of August 1919 is still not being applied. The political power and domination is exclusively exercised by the Allied victors and has only partially been delegated to the remains of the FRG organization. If one would now invent a new constitution, one would create a state within a state, and that is not possible. The state German Empire is incessantly in existence since nearly 1000 years, and on its ground exists since 1949 something like a civic self-administration organization of Germans who live under the superintendence of the Allied victors. But that which international martial law or international law does not permit in any way, and that which no victor, no matter of what origin he may be, is able to do, is to wipe out a state. The capitulation that took place in 1945 refers to the surrender of armed forces. The state does not perish hereby, and this fact has been confirmed by the Federal Constitutional Court in more than 90 judgments. This means, thus, that when we talk at all about the establishment of constitutional order, or if you want the restoration of the constitutional order, then this can only happen purely on the basis of the Constitution of 11th of August 1919. Nobody else in Germany or among the Allied victors is entitled to ordain a different constitution for us, the German people.
Und die Kapitulation, die 1945 stattgefunden hat, bezieht sich auf die Kapitulation